Assalamu alaikum. This episode is about reflection. It's about season 1 of Stories in a Cup and reflecting on what we've heard. Episode 1 was about beginnings, not the loud, celebratory kind, but the quiet ones, the kind that happen internally, the kind no one applauds, the kind that shift everything. In the conversation with Dr. Hiba, we explored what it means to question, to outgrow, and to search for something deeper. We sat with the discomfort of not having clear answers. We talked about identity, how it forms, how it changes, and how courage often looks like listening to your own heart when it would be easier not to. There was a lot of honesty in this episode. There was vulnerability. There was the quiet bravery of choosing alignment over approval. Episode 1 reminded us that transformation rarely happens overnight. It happens in small decisions, in private reflections, in moments when you decide to trust yourself. Episode 1 set the tone for the season. It's a space where stories are not rushed, where faith, belonging, and becoming are explored gently, where we hold lived experience with care. And maybe, in that first episode, you saw a reflection of your own beginning. Episode 2 was about grief. It was about becoming. It was about learning to use your voice and choosing your values over anything else. It was about the quieter grief of not fitting in or trying to belong in spaces that ask you to shrink. And in the conversation with Laura, we explored what it means to navigate identity while holding on to your own values, the subtle pressure to adjust, to soften your truth, to blend in just enough to feel accepted. We spoke about the exhaustion of trying to be understood and the courage it takes to stop performing. There was honesty in naming the grief that comes from cultural tension, from faith, from transitions. But there was also strength in Lara's story, because holding on to your values isn't loud. It's steady. It's choosing integrity over approval. Coexist with growth. Episode 2 reminded us that fitting in is not the same as belonging, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain rooted in who you truly are. Episode 3 was about starting over. In the story with Dana, we realized that she started over not in her 20s, but at 40. It was about the quiet courage of being single in a world that measures adulthood by milestones. About moving continents from the familiarity of the UAE to the uncertainty of the United States, and realizing that reinvention isn't glamorous. It's humbling. The conversation with Dana explored what it feels like to leave behind comfort, reputation, and community, and to arrive somewhere new without the safety net of anything familiar. There was grief for what was left behind, grief for timelines that didn't unfold as expected, but there was resilience. Because starting over at 40 isn't about chasing something new. It's about choosing growth over comfort. It's about believing your life is still unfolding, and it's about trusting that your story is not behind you. It's still being written. We talked about loneliness, about rebuilding community, about redefining success, about identity beyond marital status, and perhaps the most powerful thread, you're not late, you are still becoming. Episode 3 reminded us that starting again is not a failure. It is an act of faith. In episode 4, we talked about separation, but not only from a person. It was about separating from the version of yourself that never had the chance to grow independently. This conversation with Muna held the weight of endings, the kind that feel disorienting, the kind that force you to ask, who am I when I stand alone? Muna explained what it means to find your voice after years of adapting, to learn skills life never required you to learn before, to make decisions without seeking permission, to build confidence from the ground up. There was grief for what could have been, but there was also awakening, because sometimes separation is not just loss. Sometimes it's instruction. It teaches you to manage your own life, how to navigate systems, how to trust your judgment, and how to speak up, even when your voice trembles. Episode 4 reminded us that independence is not something everyone is handed. Sometimes it's learned in the aftermath. This episode was about courage, the kind that rebuilds quietly. Episode 5 was about devotion. Years poured into motherhood, into showing up, into giving, into being everything for everyone else. Episode 5 with Rula was about the kind of love that's selfless, but sometimes so selfless that you slowly disappear inside of it. This conversation held a tender realization. Somewhere along the way, her voice became quiet, not silenced, just postponed. Postponed for the sake of harmony, for the sake of stability, for the sake of being the strong one. We talked about what happens when children grow, when the house gets quieter, when life slows just enough for you to hear your own thoughts again. And in this quiet time, an awakening happens, an awareness that was never truly expressed before. Rula adapted for so long, she forgot to ask herself who she was becoming. There was no blame in this episode, no resentment, just pure honesty. Because sometimes awakening isn't dramatic, it's subtle. It's the gentle discomfort of realizing you've outgrown the version of yourself that only knew how to give. Episode 5 reminded us that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, that motherhood and individuality can coexist, that wanting more does not make you ungrateful, and that finding your voice isn't selfish, it's necessary. This episode was about remembering yourself, not instead of loving others, but alongside loving others. This space between stories is about what happens between all of those moments. The quiet in between where identity shifts, where independence forms, where clarity grows. Not one guest was the same, but every story carried courage. And maybe that's the thread, becoming.